My name is Hoang. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So the title of my talk today, the title of the paper is News Recommendation with Contextual User Profiling and Multifaceted Article Representation. And I abbreviate it as CUPMAR. So it's the initial work of this context user profiling, etc. And I'm from Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia. So let's begin the presentation. First, let's briefly introduce a news recommendation. Probably all of you knows and already use some CUP service as a new recommendation. This is one example, as you can see from the screenshot. This is Google News. And so news recommendation basically is CUP aggregated service where they aggregate a lot of different news information from different sources, and then they, based on your history, they recommend the one that will catch your interest the most. And some of the benefits from news recommendation, as you can see from the slide I provide here, is that it provides very engaging content. So you have a higher chance to interact with those content. And due to that one, it's provide a very high user retention rate. So let's make an example from Google News, because whenever I go to Google News and I see this provided recommendation item for me, I really, like those because they match my preference exactly. That's why every time I go here, I always click on those information to read the news. So very very high accuracy, and also keep me coming back for many times. Another benefit would be this reduce the cognitive load. People nowadays, sometimes we have a lot of things to do and we don't have time just to search for the thing we want. So instead of we searching for something we want, they provide the thing that we like and we just enjoy them. Let's say Netflix as a movie recommendation, it's Google News. Whenever I go there, I don't need to search for anything. I just use whatever they provided. So it's reduced me a lot of searching, a lot of thinking, and I just go there and enjoy myself. Some similar service to news recommendation aside from Google News, such as Facebook Newsfeed or LinkedIn Newsfeed. People spend a lot of time, just scrolling through this CUP application to look for news information. So this news recommendation is very useful service nowadays. And so what are the challenges of news recommendations? And the first thing that we notice is that unlike normal traditional recommendation system, news recommendation is very time sensitive. The freshness of the news are very important. So let's assume that you have a chance to read some news either today or last week. You probably would prefer to read the latest news as is the news of today, right? So the freshness of the news is very important, and usually in news recommended system, they prefer to give you the latest news first before they give you some other news in that happened earlier. And due to that time sensitive challenge, so normal collaborative filtering approach does not work well. Another challenge in news recommendation is very heavily contain a lot of textual data, such as the header, the text body. So everything about news is pretty much 90% of them are text, right? The rest might be some image, some video, but a lot of them are text. So how do we leverage textual data to infer user interest is very important as well. Another aspect is the diversity of news. So we have all kind of different news. We have sport news, entertainment news, and video news, image news, all kind of news. And we have to account diversity when we do recommendations as well. Because if you keep recommending me the same kind of news, I would lose interest very quick. Another problem is that, and this is also part of my main focus, is the multifaceted properties. This is just a fancy term for multiple properties of a news article, right? They have maybe title, they have category. Some of them contain like knowledge entities or text body, etc. So we have to account for a lot of different properties from a news article as well to do recommendation. And finally, a different user has different tastes, so different preferences. How do we account them? So here's in the picture is one example to demonstrate some of the challenges in news recommendations. As you can see, we have several users and different kind of news. So for user one, as you can see that he like to read sport news, right? So whenever he see, and the timeline is from the oldest in the bottom to the newest in the top. So he only prefer to read sport news, right? As you can see, to click on this means he read the news here, and he see the more recent news, but it's about politics, so he skip it and then he read the next news. So his preference is about sport, right? But for user two, he seems to have a different kind of preference. He does not just enjoy a certain type of news, but he more about the knowledge entity inside the news. So some news has some important entities, like let's say, if USA, people probably think about the presidency, and last year is about Trump, so he read that news, the COVID-19, and because I'm from Vietnam, so this is just an example where maybe this reader is from Vietnam, so he read the news about Vietnam and COVID-19, right? And finally, user three, his preference is just read the latest news. So he doesn't care what kind of news is that. It's just, okay, it's the latest one. I just read it, So he clicked on the latest, all right. So again, this is to demonstrate the challenges in news recommendation. Different user has different preference, different news article has different kind of property engage into them. So how do we take all of these source of information, blend them together, and make a news recommendation system? That is the challenge. So here is the CUPMAR novel model. So this is the whole model that I proposed in this paper. And the whole framework can be divided into two sides, the right side, as you can see here, and the left side. Let's talk about the right side first. How the right side is basically an encoder to take a piece of news article and encode it into an embedding vector, right? It's the the most normal way of doing deep learning. We have a signal. This is, in this case, a news article, and then we just encode them into an embedding vector. And how do we do that? I will go detail in the later slide. For now, you know that we have a news encoder here. So that is on the right side, and on the left side, this big amount of component is the user's encoder. So here we have the news encoder, and this whole thing is the user encoder. And for a user encoder, we have three main components. First is the user itself, and then we have two subcomponents called the long-term preference extractor, as in here, and the recent term or the short-term preference extractor. So the reason why we have this component is that for a user, usually they display two kind of behavior, right? We always have a certain preference that we always go back to. Like for example, for myself, I love to read news about technology. So sometimes I read some news about music, sometimes about game, but most of the time I still go back to technology to read some more news about it. So that would be my long-term preference. And the short-term reference or the recent-term preference is happen, it's as a human being, we have a fickle mind and we always changing. So maybe today I see some news about, let's say, some news about cryptocurrencies. Okay, that might be interesting. I read about it, and then I saw an advertisement about auto, and then okay, that's also interesting. So I read on it as well. So this would be my short-term preference. I would read them for maybe 1 or 2 days, but then next week I forgot about them, right? So we also want to extract those short-term preference as well. And so this component, this left hand right component does on up that job. So what it does so for each user we have a unique user embedding, and for the long-term preference extractor, we take the categories of the news. So because I I believe that category is, is somewhat encode user long-term preference. So we take one of these categories and we embed them as a long-term preference instructor into here, and then we have a vector here. And for the short-term preference instructor, it's a bit more involved. So basically, this is a deep neural network using the weighted recurrent unit layer. And for each news, you see, this is a user history news. So he read maybe in 1 week, he read 50 pieces of news article, right? So we take them on based on the timeline. And for each of them, we use the new encoder right here. We encode it into a vector, and then we use a recurrent unit layer to encode them, to learn the context within that short time frame and to encode it here. So as you can see, all of the pieces are connected together from the long-term preference, the user unit embedding, as well as the short-term preference into a very long vector. And then this goes through a dense layer to shorten that vector to have the same embedding size as the news encoder. And finally, we do a score rating algorithm here to determine the final score. This score would be the preference score of this user with this particular candidate news. And that will be the whole framework, the whole novel idea. And so, as I promised, we have this new encoder here, so now I will go deep into it. So what inside this news encoder is that, as I mentioned, this is about multifaceted properties or multiple properties of a news article, right? So here we have different pieces of signal. As you can see, we have the category of a news, a subcategory, possibly, let's say the category is sport, then subcategory would be, is it a badminton, or is it a basketball or football, So we also encoded those, take all of those signal there. And we have a category embedding to be called and embedded into a vector. Knowledge entity is something that I mentioned. Let's say a news about basketball, maybe some famous players are in there, LeBron James. So, so those are the knowledge entity that have important factor inside. So I also take those and and also embed them to become a smaller vector. Finally, we use the textual information that I mentioned in the beginning. One of the challenges is that news information has a lot of text. So we take all of those textual data as well, using a work embedding and multi-head attention layer. In the end, all of them, each of these properties have their own embedding vector. I concatenate them all, go to a dense layer, and then to strengthen out the shape of the final embedding vector. So this one will become this one, right? And yeah, so that's the news encoder. For the training, the data set I use for this novel idea is the Microsoft News data set. It is a relatively new data set that was introduced, I think, 1 year ago by Microsoft. It's a large-scale English data set we use that Microsoft use for news recommendation, and they also have a leaderboard competition on the website. So if you are interested in news recommendation, I would recommend using this news data set, and you can also compete on their website. And the loss function of my deep learning model is the same cross entropy loss model using the softmax. And we have this is the user vector and the positive news encoder. So positive means in the history of a user that he clicked on that news, so it's a positive item. And then we just divide that some summation of the positive and the negative. The negative one are the one that he did not click from an impression. So whenever you go to a website and you refresh, they provide you, let's say, 50 news article, and you only click on 2. So the rest 48 are the negative sample. So we use this formula to calculate the loss score and to train the network. And here is some of the evaluation from my novel framework. And I compare them with both the traditional model, just like the factory machine, the CNN, the simple neural network, and also with some more advanced and more involved news recommendation systems, such as Hi-Fi Arcs or NRMS. And in general, we see that CUPMAR, the novel framework, achieve a very competitive score. So we have two versions of my dataset, a big one and a small one. So for quick testing, I run them on the small one, and when for a longer train section I train them on, and then I compute them on my big dataset. And these are the measurement metric. And also, because I told you that in our framework, we have these two components, right? The long-term preference extractor and the short-term preference extractor. I want to determine that if I disable one of those components, will the performance of the whole framework downgrade? And this is indeed the case, because here we have CUPMAR, which is the whole framework, CUPShort, which is the framework, but we only use the short-term preference. And CUPK here means we only use the category embedding for the news encoder. So as you can see, we leverage the whole framework, we have actually the best score. But if we only use the short-term preference extractor, the score is still okay, but it's a bit lower than the whole framework. That's why I do the same experiment to determine if I only use the long-term preference extractor, will make the difference. And we see markedly different result is that the CUPMAR score relatively higher in terms of when compared to CUPLONG and CUPShort. So this also confirms that the CUPShort contributes more, it's using the CUPShort, we actually learn more about user preferences, right? And also I analyze if we're using the multiple properties of a news article, does it help? And as you can see that when we use CUPMAR, we also achieve the best score. But if we just use certain property inside a news article, like just as we only use the category, we achieve very low score. But if we use, let's say, the title and the textual body, we achieve a better score, but still it cannot compare to the whole framework. So this confirms two hypotheses. First is that if we take use of all many property of a news article, we achieve better score. And if we leverage both long-term and short-term extractor, we also achieve better score. That is my presentation. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any question, let me know.
Any questions from audience? If you have question, you can unmute and ask.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So you use the GRU to model the click sequence, I think. GRU.
Yeah.
Yes, GRU. So this care about the order of the clicks, right? Order of the browsing. So if you don't care about the order, does it decrease the performance a lot, or how effective this sequence model is?
That's a very nice question. And I remember so the GRU we can go for either backward or forward or both direction, right? And if I remember correctly, the performance are the same.
I see.
Yeah. So that's why in this one I just use one direction. But actually I try both backward, forward, and both bi-directional, and they are somewhat the same. Yeah.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Very nice questions.
I have a question about diversity. In your challenge, you mentioned it, right? But I cannot see the components in your module that can provide a diverse news recommendations. I'm a little bit confused.
Yeah, the diversity here is about the broad range of certain entity inside a news article. What I mean is that, let's say for categories, right? You have a lot of different categories in a news article. So that's one of the example of diversity. So when you train your model, you have to take into account all kind of different news articles, not just sport news, politics news, but entertainment news, and all kind of news, right? So that is one aspect of diversity. Another one would be the knowledge entity, as in each piece of news, we may have some let's say some events, some famous people, or some countries. So those entity you can imagine each entity is a Wikipedia aspect. So if you go for soccer, you search for Messi, you can find him on Wikipedia, right? So that those knowledge entity. And also when we train a model, we want to make sure that our trained dataset has a lot of different knowledge entity so that it balance out what user preference would be. So if somebody who only he really like Messi, a famous soccer player, and he only clicked on him. So if we train our news recommendation only contain football player, then it can only recommend news about football player. It's not enough diversity. So I hope that that answers your questions.
Yeah, I see. You consider the diversity in the features of the articles.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for your presentation. Yeah, it's a very solid work, I think.
Thank you. Yeah. So I stop my sharing. Thank you.